Hello, and welcome to Backstage, the behind-the-scenes series from Environment Variables from the Green Software Foundation, where we dig into the tools and thinking shaping green software. Today's episode is about Carmen, the carbon measurement engine for cloud applications. Originally built by engineers at Amadeus and now being brought into the Green Software Foundation's ecosystem. Carmen is an open source tool that helps organizations measure the carbon footprint of cloud software at two levels, infrastructure and application. It integrates with tools teams already use, like Kubernetes, Prometheus, and Kube State Metrics, and it's built on top of the Green Software Foundation's Impact Framework. Joining me are Florent Morel, head of Green IT at Amadeus, and Joseph Cook, R&D lead at the Green Software Foundation. Florent and Joseph, welcome to Backstage. Florent, thanks for joining us on this special episode of Backstage. For those who don't know you, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for letting me here. It's a real pleasure. So I'm formerly head of the Green IT program at Amadeus, an IT provider for the travel industry. I'm the Carmen co-creator, along with Robin Castellon, with whom I worked the past 3 years within the Carmen team. I'm now an R&D officer, defining and deploying data governance in my organization. And on a personal level, I'm an everyday cyclist. So from cycle to work to bicycle holidays with the kids across France and Europe.
Nice. I can't say that it's one of those hobbies that I think I would like to take up more of is cycling. But that's great to hear. So, Joseph, for those of us who don't know you, could you please introduce yourself too?
Sure. Hi, I'm Joseph Cook. I'm head of R&D at the Green Software Foundation. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Some of the things I've recently been involved with at the GSF include exploring the GSF's use of AI, helping to build the Impact Framework that we'll talk about today, and helping to develop standards across the GSF.
That's great. Cool. And just for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Chris Skipper. I am the podcast producer of Environment Variables. I am not an expert in anything to do with software development at all, but I am someone who knows a lot about it because of this podcast. And so if you want to know more about this, more about green software in general, you should listen to more episodes of Environment Variables, and you can be very good at your pub quiz. So before we dive in, here's a reminder that everything we talk about will be linked in the show notes below. And for my first question, I'm going to ask you, Florent, about the origin of Carmen. So before we dive into the technical side of what Carmen actually is, I want to start with why. So throughout my research, I actually noticed that you wrote a blog post where you talked about back in spring 2022, you did a rough estimate of the Amadeus airline shopping engine and an application that handles around 3 billion transactions a day. And you calculated it could be generating roughly 1 metric ton of CO2 equivalent per hour, which is obviously quite a lot. Can you take us back to that point? What did that early estimate reveal? And why did it convince you that you needed something more granular and actionable for engineers than corporate level reporting like PUE improvements and renewable energy certificates?
Where should I start? Well, I guess the first thing that this initiative revealed is that the figures I computed actually didn't mean that much. I mean, okay, 1 ton per hour might seem a lot, but is it really compared to other big IT systems? So I needed to have more granular data because 1 ton per hour, okay, it's 1 ton per hour, but what do we do about it is the most important thing. We need to see what actions we could take in order to reduce this figure actually. So let me put a bit of context here. The search and shopping applications are handling requests of most actors involved in the travel industry. Think airlines, think hotels, think travel agencies, etc. And actually, you and me, when looking for travel solutions on a given website. So that makes a lot of requests every day, 3 billion, as you mentioned, Chris. And the reasons for optimizing this application are not only related to environmental objectives, actually. The complexity of the computation increases over time. and optimizing is a must for us to stay competitive. So here I am 3 years ago, 4 years ago, fiddling with some tools found on the internet, entering the numbers of cores, amount of RAM to compute these operations. We're talking about several hundreds, thousands of cores, hundreds of terabytes of memory. So we knew this was going to be big. Once I got this figure, I stopped a bit for a while and had a thought. That's a nice figure, marketing-wise, easy to communicate. But what can we do about it? How do I get the 500 people involved in the application, not only aware of the environmental impacts of their product, but also willing to act on these green IT metrics? And this is where the GSF's Impact Framework came into play.
Awesome. Yeah. So obviously the IF is quite important to the GSF. So once you realized that you needed that sort of team level granularity, I beg your pardon. What were the first requirements that you wrote down for the tool, the things that you absolutely knew Carmen had to be able to do? And you also mentioned that you favor data consistency over accuracy. So why is that as well, as another follow-up question?
So I took the example of the airline shopping engine because this is our biggest application. But obviously, this application and many other applications in the Amadeus ecosystem are built on top of a multitude of smaller components developed by hundreds and hundreds of engineers across dedicated teams. And these are the granularity we wanted to address, ensuring that each of these component teams has the right level of information about their deliveries' environmental impacts. Another key driver was engineering leadership engagement. I wanted my CTO to be able to tell his direct report, I want you to reduce your environmental impact by that amount of % by the end of the year. And just as maintenance KPIs, this objective would cascade in the organization. So for this, we needed to have granularity at component level, but also the ability to aggregate data by management lines and products. We also needed to have to follow trends. So we also needed to follow trends so that we could integrate our data into already existing FinOps dashboards and favor data consistency over accuracy.
Thank you, Florent, for that answer. Joseph, let's talk about the Impact Framework. We've actually done an episode on what the Impact Framework is, but for our listeners who haven't heard of it, could you remind us exactly what it is and what problem does it solve?
Impact Framework is a program that allows you to calculate energy and carbon emissions for your software. It's a lightweight piece of software, and the most important thing about it is that it's completely configurable. It doesn't impose strong opinions about how you do your calculations, but it supports whatever calculations that you want to do. And the problem that it solves is that the best practices for measuring the impact of your software, it isn't always clear, and it changes pretty fast, pretty regularly. And also there's a lot of different ways that those impacts can be expressed. An Impact Framework provides a way to run any pipeline of calculations, any pipeline of models, and still get a standardized output that you can share with other people, that you can use to track your progress on environmental impacts over time, or you can publish for the world to see.
Fantastic. All right. So we obviously heard a lot about IF. Let's move on to you, Florent. Obviously, you mentioned you discovered the Impact Framework from the GSF. So let's ask you, what is Carmen exactly, and why build it on IF from the GSF?
Mainly because it was already here, doing a great job at what it does, and it was open source. Being a keen user of free and open source software since a couple of decades, it felt natural to me that we rely on such technology, with the hope of contributing back once we have something tangible to share. As Joseph explained, the IF is estimating carbon emissions thanks to a manifest file taken in input. And to put it simply, Carmen is a meta-generator of manifest files. At Amadeus, as I was saying, we have more than 400 applications, components deployed in production in the cloud, with hundreds of application owners. So I couldn't afford to ask each app owner to implement its own call to the IF. That would not be possible from a cost perspective, obviously, from a timeline perspective. I mean, how long would it take for each team to implement it? And from a consistency perspective, which constants are they going to choose? What granularity, etc. So we decided that we should build a unique engine reading data from our observability platform on one hand and our FinOps capabilities on the other hand. And one of our first challenges was to gather everyone in the company who was also fiddling with some tools found on the internet and have them join the Carmen team we created.
So it was obviously a collaborative effort, much like how IF is also a collaborative effort. Let's talk more about the technical side of Carmen. So how does Carmen measure at an infrastructure level versus an application level? Can you quickly explain what Carmen is doing at each of those levels, please?
Sure. So we have two use cases, indeed, infrastructure and application level. At infrastructure level, we are using the framework put in place by our central FinOps team. They built an extensive framework to measure our running costs on our cloud service provider platform and dispatch the cost per application based on the infrastructure view. And we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and we took benefit of what they already built. So this is a top-down approach. They get the fully detailed bill from our cloud provider containing all services that we consume, storage, virtual machines, bandwidth, etc., but also security, tooling services, and so on. Then they redispatch the cost to each application, product, component based on an internal inventory. So we plugged Carmen into this FinOps process to consume the data they retrieve from the cloud provider. We also integrate data related to resource usage before we feed the IF to compute CO2 data and use the same reallocation logic to dispatch our output to each team, application, product, component, etc. The second use case is the application level. Here, Carmen provides an API to measure what we call short-lived processes. Think non-regression runs, CI/CD, machine learning training processes, and so on. In this case, we fetch data from our observability platform for, e.g., CPU usage, RAM, etc., to generate the IF input file and reply to the requester with the corresponding electricity consumption and carbon emissions.
Fantastic. Okay, so Joseph, let's move on to the technical side of IF's function in this whole process. What does IF unlock for Carmen technically? What's the real superpower that Carmen gets from IF?
Certainly. The Impact Framework is different from other Carmen calculators because you can run any calculation model that you like, but you still get a transparent, formatted output file that you can share with everyone, with others. Your output file is your environmental disclosure, but it's also your proof of working out. So other people can take it and run it for themselves, check you're working, make improvements. It's both a calculation engine and also a disclosure format. And if you want to run a new or a different calculation, well, you can just build it. For Carmen, Impact Framework sits at the low level. It's a building block. It's a primitive that Carmen builds on top of. Impact Framework is where the actual calculation models sit. And the important thing is whatever models, whatever calculations that you choose to do, Impact Framework will produce a standard structured output. And that means that it's easy for other projects like Carmen to build on top of it. You can, for example, build new connectors. You can interact with new data sources. You can build new dashboards or inspection tooling, all with Impact Framework at the base layer. One of the big advantages of Impact Framework as well is that there's a large ecosystem of plugins. So if there's a calculation that's not already supported by Impact Framework, you can go away, use our templates, and very quickly build a plugin of your own. And you can swap those plugins out. You can change the calculation pipeline without disturbing the rest of the ecosystem of software that you've built on top.
Fantastic. Okay, so Florent, let's talk about outcomes. If a company adopts the IF Carmen stack, what's the first meaningful insight they tend to get? Is it hotspots, waste, comparisons between environments, team accountability. What shows up fast and helps you to make decisions in your business?
So let's go back to a way I used to present Carmen. We're putting the IF at scale. So the IF is great to handle a few applications. Carmen was built to industrialize the IF. Carmen is the enterprise version of the IF, actually. This means that a company adopting Carmen will be able to get a single view on the environmental impact of all applications covered by Carmen at no implementation cost for the application owners. I see Carmen and other Green IT KPIs monitoring tools as an enabler for engineering teams. You will be able to study the metrics, identify improvement actions, implement them, and monitor the effects.
Fantastic. Okay, so Florent, let's ask you a question about the use of Carmen inside an organization. So who is Carmen actually for? When you've seen this work well, who owns it internally?
From experience, if you want to engage everyone in the company, engineering leadership is the key enabler for a successful Green IT program implementation. So clear objectives should be set at engineering leadership level and cascaded in all areas of the organization. This is a success factor, as everybody would then be entitled to act on their delivery emissions.
Great. And so let's talk about how this actually works within a team itself. So within a DevOps team, for example, how do you recommend organizations turn Carmen's numbers into actions? What are the best patterns that you've seen for integrating this into platform engineering or DevOps routines and FinOps teams, for example?
So once you have the engineering leadership buy-in, again, key success factor, minimize and or reduction objectives can be set and cascaded. Then each component contributor will be able to act on a different factor of the SCI and its environmental impact. By studying the components emitting the most, software engineers can identify improvement actions, put them in the technical debt backlog, implement them, and follow the results on the refresh data, as I was saying. But also platform architect can act on the carbon intensity by integrating it in the region's decision-making process. Product managers can work with developers to spot inefficiencies and eventually remove unused features. So this is just an example of different actors. But what is interesting with the SCI and with Green IT monitoring tools is that you have a lot of actors who can play a role on different aspects of these impacts.
Yeah, that's actually one of the key guiding principles of the GSF, is trying to find adopters of tools or just one or two members within an organization that will become advocates for green software, So it's a similar sort of principle in that sense. So let's talk about the future for Carmen and for GSF members. Florent, let's talk about the roadmap. So just from my research on looking at the GitHub, there's hints at expanding beyond VMs into storage and other cloud services. What's the near-term roadmap you're most excited about? And what does the future look like for Carmen itself?
First milestone was the actual ownership transfer to the GSF, which occurred yesterday, actually. So, woohoo, that's a great achievement for us. And regarding the roadmap, what I would say is that we built Carmen for our usage, our technical stack at Amadeus. But it was designed since the beginning with its open sourcing in mind. Thus, we knew we would have to integrate it with other observability platforms, run on other cloud services. We hope the community will contribute to this. Another key aspect is the dashboards displaying Carmen output. As I was saying earlier, we relied on our FinOps dashboards to put cost and emissions side to side. We couldn't open source the dashboard stack, obviously, as it is not part of Carmen. At the moment, the Carmen open source version is outputting a CSV file. So the first thing, I guess, would be a UI layer to enable the reporting and monitoring activities to be displayed in a nice and user-friendly way.
Brilliant. Yeah, we obviously like great representation of data here. We actually have a little bit of a thing about it here on the podcast, especially with UI and UX. But Joseph, let's talk about GSF involvement and how members can get engage with the Carmen IF stack. So from the GSF perspective, what does it mean when a project like Carmen joins the foundation ecosystem? And what opportunities does that create for members themselves?
It's fantastic when a project joins because it means that that project gets a lot more visibility and many more people get to benefit from it and also contribute to it. It means the project is available to other teams that might want to develop something similar in-house, meaning that we avoid duplicating effort. Bringing a project inside the GSF means it benefits from the eyes of a large, highly engaged community that will make sure that it has the maximum impact. If a GSF member is listening and wants to get involved, they can go to the Carmen GitHub repository that's now inside the GSF Green Software Foundation organization, and firstly try using the software, ask questions on the discussion board, or if they're technically inclined, they can pick up an issue from the issue board and improve something about the software itself, or even make their own feature and share it with the community.
Fantastic. Okay, so one quick question for each of you before we wrap up this podcast. Florent, what would success look like 1 year from now for Carmen in the community? And Joseph, what's one thing you'd love to see the industry normalize as a result of tools like Carmen sitting on top of the IF?
It's already an honor to see Carmen being integrated in the GSF portfolio. I would consider it a success if we have companies implement it and contribute to it. Then I would love to see how they integrate it in their corporate green IT strategy, get feedbacks, and see what are the successes they can build on top of Carmen.
And Joseph?
I'd love to see more standardization of methods and more transparent disclosures so that the community can verify what's done and why. One of the most exciting things for me about Impact Framework is that anyone can download and re-execute manifest files, meaning that improving measurements and improving performance can be a whole village effort.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've come to the end of this episode of Environment Variables and the special episode of Backstage featuring Carmen. So thanks very much to both of you, Florent and Joseph. Final reminder that if you want to find out more about Carmen, you can head to the Green Software Foundation's website, which is greensoftware.foundation, or you can click the link below in the show description. And if you want to listen to more episodes of Environment Variables, you can visit podcast.greensoftware.foundation, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Bye for now.
Bye.